a crowd at PPG Paints Arena last night. I could barely hear the broadcast in my ear at times, which is a good thing to say how great the fans were here in Pittsburgh. The Penguins becoming just the sixth team since 2016 to come back from a 3-0 deficit and force a game six as we welcome you into Get Me the Brandy, Hailey Hunter alongside the Athletics, Jesse Marshall. Jesse, so great to have you on with us here today. What a game. Would you say that that was probably the best we've seen the Pens maybe play all series?
I think so. Yeah. I think that was the first time, Haley, we really saw them successfully. I think for a full 60 minutes, find their way through the neutral zone against what the Flyers have
Mhm.
been doing defensively. They set up shop in the offensive zone. I think that they had a couple looks on Dan Vladar that were closer to the net than they've gotten at other points in the series, where the Flyers have been
Yes.
doing a good job of keeping them to the outside and pushing them to the perimeter. So you've heard the guys all say last night that they felt like they were finding it. They were getting into a rhythm. The flow was coming back, and I think the eye test certainly backs that up. I thought that again, the Flyers really struggled to keep them at bay and prevent them from getting those clean entries across the blue line.
Yeah, could not agree with you more. And then, of course, Sidney Crosby starting to see his game kind of get to where we were expecting it to be in this Flyers series. 100th career post season win for him, just the fourth active player to record 100. And just a big reason that we're even going into this game six in Philly tomorrow. Pointless in the first two, 5 points in the last three. What have you noticed watching these games that's kind of been different about him in these last three, Jesse?
Yeah, I think he's continuing to find another gear. There's no mystery that he came into this playoff, Haley, a little bit beat up, coming off the injury. And I think that that's caused him to lack some of maybe that burst that he can get through the neutral zone, some of the separation he can get. What you saw last night was just him dominating in his office, which is along those boards. And he's just, you don't, people don't traditionally think of Sidney Crosby as a power forward, but at the end of the day, he is a hard human to move. And along the wall last night, protecting pucks, keeping plays alive, distributing the puck at that elite level that we know that he can do. I think that he's found ways to operate and find success in the offensive zone as the series has progressed. And he's just a difficult individual to mark. You would think that with someone of his name brand recognition, he wouldn't be somebody you can lose on the ice, but his ability to navigate through traffic, go high, low, get up by the blue line, come back down to the corner. It makes him a difficult guy to keep track of, and he's really been using that to his advantage this last few games.
Yeah, well said. I know it. Some of his back checks lately have been insane. I'm like, it's hard to believe you're in your upper 30s, dude. But I will say, I did not like the cross check from, I believe it was Connect Me at the end of last game at
Yeah,
the buzzer. I'm kind of. Do you think maybe we saw that because he Crosby? I wouldn't say it was as vicious, but he kind of uh, laid a big hit on Sanheim at the end of the buzzer last game. Maybe it was a little bit of a retaliation type thing there.
yeah, and I think there's a little frustration boiling over from Travis Konechny, who's had a little bit of trouble finding the back of the net in the score sheet in this series himself. But I will tell you what I
Mhm.
loved, Haley, was the lack of response from Sidney Crosby in that situation. Over the course of the
Yeah.
last few games, the Penguins have been getting that second man in penalty, right? Where something happens. We saw Brian Russ, speaking of Konechny, get elbowed in the face a couple games ago. He retaliates. Penguins end up shorthanded. Always an issue in the playoffs, right? It's always going to be that second man in that's going to get the call. So I love the response last night. Right? There's a little bit of a scuffle, right? You had Letang and Martone going at it. Letang with the old stone face, glare to him at the end of the game. But I love this that it was mostly just skate away. That's got to be the mantra from Game Six. Don't put yourself shorthanded. You know this stuff is going to happen. It's been 5 games of it now, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to gain anything from. You don't win the series trying to defend your honor there. I love that they just turned around and got had their words and moved on. That's going to have to be the way it goes for them to crawl back into this thing fully.
Yeah, that game three was tough to watch. I believe it was 50 penalty minutes. And then, you go into the next game. Okay, we're down to 26 penalty minutes. Then last night, we're down to 18 penalty minutes. So, to your point, it seems like the Penguins are starting to learn their lesson here. But just how important is it for them to continue to kind of, not retaliate post whistles if they're going to win this next one, maybe two games? Because it seemed like that was a big reason the Flyers were able to get to their game.
100%. I think you go back to Game Three, Haley, that parade to the penalty box, where I think the officials clearly had kind of lost sense of what the best outcome should be given all the scrum that was happening. That really changed the course of the momentum of that hockey game, right? And part of the Stanley Cup playoffs is being able to overcome that. But I think again, it's about avoiding those self-inflicted wounds and giving yourself the opportunity to get on the power play. I think one thing I keep going back to is this Penguins power play is very good all year long, right? Scored a ton of goals against the Flyers on the power play in the regular season. They haven't had their signature moment yet in the series, and you almost feel like you're not going to go all the way through this thing before they get one. And you can't cancel those out, right? I mean, those chances are going to be, as you said, right, that the whistles are getting tighter in the series. We're seeing less and less. The number of scrums certainly isn't going down. I think if anything, that's increasing. But I think the officiating is getting tighter. So don't rob yourself of the ability to give yourself that signature moment on the power play at some point.
Depth scoring. I feel like that's going to be important too. That was a big part of the Penguins' success in the regular season. I remember the stat from last year. It was 69% of their goals came from their top three players, top three scorers, rather. And this season, 68% of them, the exact opposite, came from everybody but their top three skaters. We didn't really see a whole lot of that these first four games. So, how nice was it to see guys like Elmer Soderblom break through, first playoff goal, and Connor Dewar? I mean, he's usually praised for his defensive skills, but he's got quite the shot.
They've been momentum changing shifts from that bottom six. And I know that Ben Kindle didn't get on the scoreboard last night, Haley, but there's this stat in hockey called game score where they take all the things that you did over the course of the game and weight them by their importance and then spit out this number that explains how good your night was. Nobody had a better game score than Ben Kindle in game five. He was controlling the play every time he was on the ice. Flyers really struggled to get into the offensive zone against him. And if you go back even to Connor Dewar's goal, the second goal of the game in Game Five,
Yeah.
that that goal was set up by an Elmer Soderblom. I called it a hero shift on Twitter, but he was in the offensive zone for over a minute. He had set up shop down there, fighting to keep pucks in zone, winning battles along the wall, getting deflection opportunities. They've, I think you were seeing now Dan Muse is a coach that is fully confident in deploying the third and fourth line in any scenario he can. I mean, there's no reservation there whatsoever, which is a testament to the performance of those guys. And, when I mentioned earlier, I think, it's been really difficult the last few games for the Flyers to find their own route to creating even strength offense. Those bottom
Yeah.
two lines are a big reason why.
Huge. You mentioned Ben Kindle too. Not the biggest of guys. You're going into playoff hockey against the Philadelphia Flyers. How do you feel he's kind of handled the physicality? And I will add to that, it was kind of funny. I forget who it was. It might have been Martone a couple games ago. Was kind of trying to get him to retaliate, and Ben just kind of laughed in his face, like, "Dude, what? You really think I'm going to retaliate here?" I love to see that maturity, that responsibility from the now 19-year-old.
Yeah. We don't traditionally think of Ben Kindle as being somebody that other players get frustrated with, but he's so good defensively, Haley, that it gets really annoying to have to deal with that for 20 minutes a night. And you've got him on your back constantly. He's back checking you. He's got an active stick. He's swatting pucks off your blade. That has its own mental wear after some time. I
Yeah.
really think as this series has gone on, he's embraced that physicality a little bit more. And it's not going to ever be something Ben Kindle's game is predicated on. That'll never be his bread and butter. But I think, as the tenor of the game changes in the postseason and the spotlight gets put on the checking and finishing your checks and being involved physically, I think he's fully engaged in that now. And I think you saw it last night again, and how frustrating he can be in the neutral zone and the gap control he can keep. It's almost like having an extra defenseman on the ice sometimes. So, he's always done a great job of turning those situations into offense. I think that's really what his whole junior career was about, was, haunting guys defensively, stealing the puck, taking it the other way. That's kind of what he's doing to the Flyers now. So I think you look at game six, I think the pressure's on them to find a solution to that, and
Yeah.
to find a way to live a little bit more in the offensive zone against him.
It's been nice to see how good of a job he's done by trying to stay away. If a hit's coming, he can kind of read it ahead of time and protect himself. But you look at a guy like Ben Kindle, okay, Elmer Soderblom, Igor Chinikov, Mantha, Wotherspoon, all these new guys come in here under Kyle Dubas. I mean, how much has it surprised you or impressed you just how quickly they've all been able to kind of buy into the system and have success right away? Because some of these guys were not having success, where they came from, but they come to Pittsburgh and Kyle Dubas, Dan Muse, they just seem to have a good plan in place for all these guys.
Yeah, the Midas touch, right? I'll tell you this, Haley. I've been watching hockey for a long time, and you always see general managers that go out and they sign guys to maybe a 1 year deal. They bring them in, they give them a prove yourself contract, and if things don't work, maybe they trade them at the deadline. These were all moves that, I think people perceived as, okay, maybe you bring a Justin Brazeau in, and then in March you can flip him for a draft pick or something like that. not couldn't do it, right? I mean, these players were fundamentally important to the run that the team was on. They were a big reason why they arrived here in the first place. And I don't know that I've ever recalled a time, Haley, where a general manager went out, took a bunch of swings, and every one of them landed him on base somehow. It's truly remarkable, I think, when you think about it. And even moving forward, through the rest of the year to be able to bring in a Soderblom or a Chinikov. I mean, these are guys that have had massive impacts in both the run leading up to the postseason and the postseason itself. So truly impressive piece of work from Kyle Dubas. I think most of what he touched this season turned to gold. And you look around, and he was able to execute all these moves, Haley, and not mortgage any of the um, you know uh,
You know,
number of draft picks that he's got available to him over the next couple of years.
this guy's a genius. My gosh, it's been so much fun to watch. Well, I feel like, the fourth line for the Penguins, that was probably a big part of why they've been able to win the last two, too. And I'm not saying that they didn't have an impact in the first three games, but it just seemed like they started to get back to their chemistry that we saw from them this season. Just what do you think's kind of, made them so hard to play against, not only the last two games, but overall this season? Because head coach Dan Muse mentioned last night that he felt like, they really started to take their game to another level.
Yeah, you have to give a big shout to Blake Lizotte in this space. And I think that they really missed him when he was out with that injury down the stretch run. I think his addition has been welcome in the sense that he fits the bill for playoff hockey. I mean, I think about what this time of year is about. You think about what is required of players in the bottom six to be successful this time of year. It's sort of like the makeup of what Lizotte does. And I think especially in this series, Haley, the Flyers have is going back, especially to games 1 through 3. They really tried to protect their own blue line. They tried to protect Dan Vladar and pack it in. And when they do that, you've got to have guys that can go retrieve pucks. That's super important. Guys that can crash in the offensive zone, get into the boards, retrieve a puck, keep the play alive, and wait for help, right? And that's been where I think Blake Lazotte's been most impactful. Since he's been back in the lineup, is his ability to hound those pucks and keep the Flyers on their heels, and so they can't set up shop in the neutral zone and play that trap. So that's the big piece of it, right? I think that they've laid the blueprint down for the Penguins on how to get back into this series. You're not going to be able to do it by skating your way through the neutral zone. It's put the work boots on, get the waders on. It's going to have to be ugly and hard work, but they've certainly set the tempo.
Can you feel it? Springtime hockey is on the horizon.
We've been waiting for this, right?
They score! That's why you play the game right there, man.
You can see they know they have a chance against anyone in the league.
Look at this guy. He's on a mission.
Everybody step up and just play right.
These Penguins will not quit. This team is special. There's something going on here. You gotta believe in the boys in black and gold.
What'd you make of just how good this PK has been? And, in the playoffs, I feel like you especially can get so much momentum from having a good kill. You don't want to be on the PK, but if you can kill it off, that does give you some juice.
Absolutely, and I feel like coming into this series, the Flyers' power play was limping quite a bit,
Yeah.
at or near the bottom of the league, right, for most of the stretch run. The success that they were having in qualifying for the postseason, getting over that hump, was really coming from their even strength play. And I like the Penguins have kind of ratcheted it up here a little bit and gone with that power kill approach, right? So they don't give the Flyers any time and space. They're really being aggressive on those zone entries, and then once that puck crosses the blue line, you don't settle, right? Don't let them take control and establish a tempo. Stay on them, forecheck, take that time and space away. The one thing you don't want to have happen here is the Flyers power play to suddenly find itself in these last two games, right? That would be a disastrous outcome. So I think, continue to keep that pressure dialed up to 11. And I think Dan Muse has always been super aggressive, going even back to his USHL game days, and how he wants to organize his penalty kill and have it attack, and have really active forwards. So I think if they can keep that going, Haley, it's going to be really hard for the Flyers to try to find tempo and success.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. Well, it's also nice to see Chris Letang get going these last couple of games, back-to-back game winners. Um, I wouldn't say he's been really playing to his potential the last couple of months. And I felt like I said this after his game winner on Saturday. It just seemed like you could sense a little more confidence in him. I mean, how huge is it to have him, I guess, feeling at his best right now? Because vintage veteran Chris Letang could be really scary for the Flyers the rest of the way here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, one of the most critical aspects to these last two games that they've won has been the Letang Girard pairing sort of finding its level at even strength. I
Yeah.
think they had a rough go of it those first few games. We're on the losing side of things in terms of not only goal numbers but just how they were able to mitigate shots and scoring chances. I mean, it's remarkable to consider this because it's Chris Letang, but in game one of that series, Chris Letang and Sam Girard were not on the ice for a scoring chance uh,
Huh?
at all for the full duration of their TOI, which almost doesn't seem possible, right? But I think now, 4 or 5 games later, you've seen this thing completely flip on its head. There's confidence there. And I think they've simplified it, right? I think you go back to the beginning of the series, there was a lot of probably extra passes or extra maneuvers, spin moves at the blue line, different things that were a little too dressed up for the postseason. And I think
Mhm.
getting back to the basics. I mean, look at Letang's goal last night. It was just a puck on net, right? And then the hockey gods took over from there and did their thing. But it's that simplification and not overthinking it and living to fight another day, right? I that's really what it's about. And I think that they've you don't want to say they've toned it down, I think, but they've cut out some of that excess and have really again found that level and have started to take games over. You're not just looking for one scoring chance anymore, Haley. They're generating, a baker's dozen.
Simple, hard hockey, as Brian Russ keeps preaching in the locker room. We've definitely seen more of that. And it was funny because, you mentioned, like, of course, that's the one that Chris Letang ends up scoring on. He was laughing before that. He's like, all the chances I've had, and that's the one that goes in. But obviously, great. A goal is a goal at the end of the day. Wanted to get your thoughts though on this goaltending change too. Stu Skinner, the first three starts in net, and then we see Artie Shilov's come in kind of cold. He hadn't played in a week and a half. I know some fans were kind of nervous about that. Like, is that going to affect him at all? I will tell you, Flyers head coach Rick Tocchet probably not nervous at all. He knows what he can bring because he was his head coach for the Canucks when Artie came in and just played lights out to help them advance in the playoffs. That was his last NHL playoff experience. But what have you made of Artie so far? And were you surprised that they brought him in? Some people would say kind of cold.
I think mostly because it's hard to pin any blame on Stuart Skinner, Haley, right? I think there were
Right.
opportunities for him he was standing on his head, facing two
Yes.
on O's, right? And all manner of wild scenario. So it was hard to finger point there, right? But I think that last outing he had was rough. Dan Muse has kept Artie Silovs fresh all year specifically for this purpose. And I would never go as far as to say that winning a Calder Cup in the American Hockey League is the same thing as the Stanley Cup playoffs. But lest we forget, Artie Silovs won a Calder Cup last year and backstopped his team all
Uh,
the way through the AHL postseason and was phenomenal on that run. So he's no stranger to playoff scenarios and has been in some pretty high stakes situations in their own right before. So it shocks me that he's been as good as he's been. Right, coming off cold, you wouldn't expect that. But I do
yeah.
wonder if like that time off was good for him. Right, I mean the rigors of the travel schedule, the practice schedule, right? Playing more games, right? This is just a much different environment than the AHL. The Penguins kind of treated him as a 1A, 1B all year long. And I think that mental reset might have ultimately been good for him. I know, he probably would have liked to have had that second goal back last night, but you can excuse that when he made a couple other 10-bell saves over the course of the night.
Totally. Could have been. I mean, we might not even be here right now talking about a game six if it wasn't for some of his incredible saves. But I will say the guys in front of him, I think they are playing a little bit tighter defensively. What have you noticed about just kind of the way the defense has adapted, if you will, from, I guess, game one, game two to now game five?
Well, Haley, I think that Dan Muse has taken pause in this series to give the Flyers a nice large teaspoon of their own medicine. And we saw the Flyers come out at the beginning of the series and just trap, right? I mean, they had three guys at their defensive blue line. They were taking the
Yeah.
Penguins' first pass away, forechecking hard. And I think now Dan Muse is kind of saying, "Here you go, have a little bit of that." I think the Penguins have done a phenomenal job of protecting their own blue line. Outside of some hiccups where maybe they mismanaged the puck, they haven't given the Flyers a lot of clean breaks and odd man rushes into the net, right? I mean, there's been circumstances that have
Yeah.
happened where, power play, they had a rough one last night, but for the most part, at even strength, it's been really hard for the Flyers to generate scoring chances. That really goes back to game three. The shot map for the Flyers in game three looked like a real large piece of Swiss cheese, and they haven't really found their way back since then. So, credit to the coach of the Penguins for saying, hey, two can tango, and what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and kind of feeding a little bit of that stinginess back to Rick Tocchet. So we'll see what his answer is, right? But I think the Penguins are the gap control's been great. The defensemen have been really strong at their own blue line, and it's a five-man
Yeah.
commitment, Haley. That's really what it comes down to. When you go back to the third period last night, guys are throwing their bodies in lanes, diving out for pucks. It was all hands on deck, and if you enjoy good defensive hockey, you probably really enjoyed the third period of Game 5.
More desperation. I feel like we needed to see that. It seemed like it took the Penguins a little while to kind of warm up to, okay, this is playoff hockey. And I love what you said about taste of your own medicine, because as a Penguins fan, those first three games were tough to watch. I should say mostly the first couple of games. So really good to see that for the Pens. But okay, so now we go back to Philly. The last thing the Flyers wanted to do was get on a flight, come back to Pittsburgh. Now they got to go back after losing two games to play in front of their home crowd. Flyers fans are probably not too thrilled right now. How much pressure do you think this team is feeling right now? And I wonder how much that pressure has maybe played into their last two losses as well.
Yeah, I think the pressure is fully shifted over to them now, Haley. You heard Rick Tocchet today, entertaining a potential number of lineup decisions. Maybe Bonk coming in defensively for them. I think that means he's potentially looking for an answer, way to shake this up. I think at the end of the game last night, I keep going back at it. And, you hate to use body language as evidence or anything, but Porter Martone was heated. A lot of the Flyers were heated. Konechny obviously heated with that cross check, and the Penguins just stone-faced, right? Skated away, looked locked in. The rhetoric in the room, I think afterwards, was that we haven't really done anything yet. We need to win one more game. And I think that
Yep.
that one more game focus is something that they're really wholly bought into here. So, that game 6, Haley, the Penguins get an early goal. They take the Flyers, that ability to trap away. That arena gets silent. The weight of that could crush the roof. So it'll be interesting to see how that thing starts, and the Penguins could really take the wind out of their sails if they get on them early.
Do you think we're going to see a lot of line changes? I know Rick Tocchet talked earlier about maybe putting a couple of other players in too.
I do think you might see a bonk for Philly, Haley. I think they're looking for a guy that can carry the puck and help disrupt what the Penguins are doing in the neutral zone, and I think he could certainly aid in that.
Yeah.
I do think though that is the shift for them now is how do we navigate this, and how do we fight our way through the neutral zone and get some of our own scoring chances at even strength? Does that mean Michkov comes back in the series, right? He was somebody that took a night off last night, got healthy scratched, wasn't super impactful at the beginning, but we know he has hands. We know he has a lethal shot. He was a critical persona for them running down that stretch and getting into the postseason. So does that change get made? I don't know. I think Rick Tocchet's going to do whatever he can do to try to gain some puck movement and some guys that can move this thing and dangle their way through. I mean, Bump obviously last night made a huge play to
Right
respond
away.
in 6 seconds to that second. Yeah, right. That second goal, and his skating, you can see why he was in the lineup, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
wasn't quite an end-to-end rush, but it was a half ice rush. So I think that's what they're looking for more of, Haley. So I do think that they'll potentially do whatever they need to shake this thing up, and if nothing else, right, try to send a message to the team that they need to tighten up, and that nobody's spot's necessarily secure here.
Yeah, Bump had scored in his NHL debut at PPG Paints Arena in Pittsburgh back in March, comes back in for his next game in Pittsburgh in the playoffs and scores right away. I mean, what a start in Pittsburgh for that guy. But to your point about Bonk, yeah, one NHL game, what an opportunity for him to come right into the playoffs if we do see him tomorrow. So I'm curious, a person, a unit, anything with this team to be able to force a game 7, who needs to really be a difference maker tomorrow? Who needs to really step up their game? What do you think?
We have yet, Haley, to see a signature moment in this playoffs from Igor Chinikov. And I do not
Yes,
know
that's
that we can last much longer without that having taken place. And he's had shot attempts off the rush. I think he's missed the net a lot. I think that's really what it comes down to is that he's hasn't gotten them on goal. And I think that, we know that thing has eyes with him sometimes, right? He needs the smallest, a puck-sized space is all he needs to sneak that thing in occasionally. So I'm looking for Igor Chinikov to get off the schneid a little bit here, get on the score sheet, and I think you can only contain him for so long before that elite shot of his finds its way in. And boy, he would be a welcome addition to the score sheet in the game 6. So put me down for a Chinikov breakout game, Haley.
Love it. Yes, I'm hoping that we see it. I think he missed the net 5 times 2 games ago, and then a couple more times last night as well. So it's been tough to watch because before we used to always talk about this guy can't miss. Like it seems like every time he had the puck, he was going to score. So yeah, we've definitely been waiting for that. And he had a target on his back the first couple of games. You could really tell the Flyers were going after him. So I think he's kind of gotten away from that, adjusted to the pace of play, and hopefully we'll see that from him. Okay, so finally, are we going to see a win tomorrow? What do you think? The Penguins get it done in Philly?
Yeah, I like the odds here, Haley. I think that everything again,
Okay.
it's just a matter of time for me on that power play. I think that they're going to get an
Yeah.
opportunity to get that thing back on track. It looked so much better, I thought, in Game 5. They found their way into the zone. They were in the zone for a long time. They just couldn't get to the back of the net. And I think now if they can find that zone time and they can avoid some of those mistakes that they were making on their entries where they were getting stuck at the red line and having to regroup and the Flyers were breaking things up. If they can get that zone time together, I think it's only a matter of time before they make their mark with that man advantage. Artie Shilov seems to be playing some really strong hockey right now. He's dialed in. They seem to be getting hot. Game sevens, you flip a coin, right? But I like their odds to get there at the rate that they're playing right now.
Okay, Igor Chinikov, goal at even strength. And how about an Eric Carlson shot from the point on the power play? I'd love to see that. So
It's a good
great to have you
combination.
on, Jesse. Thanks for all of your insights. And the Penguins looking to become just the 5th team in NHL history, right? To come back from a 3-0 deficit and win the series. Looking forward to that game tomorrow night. And that's going to do it for Get Me the Brandy. We'll see you next time.